In a weathered farmhouse at the edge of town, 78-year-old Harold Preston sits alone with devastating news: 3 months left to live. Just as the silence of his empty home becomes unbearable, fate delivers an unexpected gift. 5 foster brothers, ages 6 to 14, temporarily placed in his care. Despite his frail health, Harold finds himself drawn to their hopeful eyes and infectious laughter. As autumn leaves begin to fall, this unlikely family forms a bond that transforms both the old farmhouse and the community around them. The boys bring chaos and joy. Harold shares wisdom and love. Together they create something beautiful in the face of time's relentless march. Could the last chapter of one man's life become the first chapter of 5 young boys' futures? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through dusty window panes, casting long shadows across Harold Preston's kitchen table. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he traced the edge of the manila envelope containing Dr. Mitchell's final verdict. 3 months. The words echoed in his mind like footsteps in an empty hallway. On the wall, Emma's face smiled down at him from their wedding photo, her eyes bright with youth and promise. 47 years together, and now 5 years without her. The farmhouse seemed to grow larger and emptier with each passing season, its creaking floorboards and drafty corners a constant reminder of his solitude. Harold pushed himself up from the chair, his joints protesting the movement. The kitchen clock ticked steadily. 6:30 a.m., same as every morning. Some habits didn't die, even when you knew your days were numbered. He shuffled to the counter, measuring coffee grounds with precision born of decades of routine. Through the window, he could see the changing landscape of what had once been the heart of farming country. Where neighboring farms once stretched to the horizon, suburban developments now crept closer like an advancing tide. His 3 acres remained an island of the past, stubbornly holding out against the march of progress. Mrs. Thompson's silhouette appeared in her kitchen window next door, and Harold ducked slightly to avoid her worried gaze. Since Emma's passing, the retired schoolteacher had appointed herself his unofficial guardian, bringing over casseroles and concern in equal measure. She meant well, but her attention only emphasized his growing vulnerability. The coffee maker sputtered its last drops as Harold retrieved Emma's favorite mug from the cabinet, force of habit, even after all these years. The morning routine continued, toast with butter and jam, medications lined up like tiny soldiers, and the daily crossword puzzle Emma had always loved to solve. His hand shook more noticeably as he tried to write eternal in 2 down. The doctor's words crept back into his thoughts. Advanced stage. Aggressive. Options limited. Harold had sat there in the sterile examination room, nodding calmly, as if discussing the weather rather than his own mortality. He declined the offered treatments that might buy him a few extra weeks. What was the point of stretching out the inevitable? A knock at the door startled him from his reverie. Through the glass panes, he could see Mrs. Thompson on his porch, holding what looked suspiciously like another casserole. Harold sighed, straightened his cardigan, and went to face another day of well-meaning compassion. "Harold Preston, you haven't been answering your phone," she said by way of greeting, bustling past him into the kitchen. At 72, Martha Thompson moved with the energy of someone 20 years younger, her silver hair neatly styled and her clothes pressed to perfection. "Battery's dead," he lied, knowing full well he'd simply turned it off after Dr. Mitchell's call yesterday. "Humph." She set the casserole on the counter and turned to face him, hands on her hips. "You look peaked." "Have you eaten?" Harold gestured to his half-finished breakfast. "I managed just fine, Martha. Like you managed that roof leak last winter, or the broken furnace." Her tone softened. "Harold, you can't keep going on alone like this. Emma wouldn't want—" "Emma's not here," he cut her off, more sharply than intended. The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken words. Martha's eyes drifted to the medical papers on the table, but Harold moved to block her view. guiding her toward the door with what he hoped was convincing vigor. "Thank you for the casserole. I'll bring back the dish tomorrow. You know I'm just next. Door if you need anything," she reminded him, reluctantly allowing herself to be ushered out. "Anything at all." Harold watched from the window as she walked back to her house, her posture radiating concern. When she was gone, he sagged against the wall, exhaustion seeping into his bones. The house creaked around him, its familiar sounds now seeming like whispered reminders of all the maintenance he'd been neglecting. In the living room, Emma's piano gathered dust, sheet music still open to the last song she'd played. Her garden outside was overrun with weeds, the rose bushes she'd tended so lovingly now, wild and untamed. Everything around him spoke of slow decay, of a life winding down to its final measures. 3 months. Perhaps it was better this way. Quick, decisive like pulling off a bandage. No long, drawn-out decline. No becoming a burden. Just enough time to put his affairs in order and say goodbye to this old house, the last holdout of a bygone era. Harold picked up the medical papers, tucking them away in Emma's old recipe box, where Martha's prying eyes wouldn't find them. He had 3 months of solitude left, and he intended to face them with the same quiet dignity with which he'd faced everything else in life. Alone, but standing firm, like the last farm standing against the tide of time. The knock that changed everything came on a Tuesday afternoon. Harold had been dozing in his armchair, a half-finished crossword puzzle sliding from his lap, when the sharp rap of knuckles against wood jolted him awake. This wasn't Mrs. Thompson's familiar gentle tapping. This was the authoritative knock of someone with official business. On his doorstep stood a young woman in a neat blazer, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. Behind her, huddled together on the porch steps, were 5 boys of varying ages, their expressions a mixture of wariness and barely contained energy. "Mr. Preston?" The woman consulted a tablet in her hands. "I'm Grace Chen, from Child Protective Services. I apologize for the short notice, but we have an emergency placement situation." Harold blinked, certain he was still dreaming. There must be some mistake. "No mistake, sir. Your home was approved for foster care placement last year." She glanced at her tablet again. The application was submitted by Emma Preston. The name hit him like a physical blow. Emma had mentioned wanting to become foster parents once he retired, but her illness had intervened. He'd forgotten all about the application. "That was my wife," he said quietly. "She passed away 5 years ago." Ms. Chen's professional demeanor faltered slightly. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Preston. Unfortunately, our system wasn't updated, but since you're still listed as approved," she gestured to the boys, "we're in desperate need of emergency placement for these brothers, just for a few days until we can find a more permanent solution." The oldest boy, lanky and protective, stood slightly in front of his brothers. He looked about 14, with serious eyes that had seen too much. The youngest couldn't have been more than 6, clutching a worn backpack to his chest like a shield. "I'm not—" Harold started to protest, thinking of the doctor's prognosis sitting in Emma's recipe box. "I'm not in a position to—" But something in the boy's expression stopped him. He recognized that look, the same one he'd seen in his own eyes after Emma died, that mixture of loss and hope and fear of what came next. "This is Michael," Miss Chen said, indicating the oldest. "Then James and Robert, they're 12 and 10. Peter is 8, and Tommy is 6. Each boy nodded, as his name was called except Tommy, who buried his face in Michael's jacket. Before Harold could form another protest, a gust of autumn wind swept across the porch, sending leaves skittering around their feet. The youngest boy, Tommy, shivered visibly in his too thin jacket. "Perhaps we could continue this discussion inside," Miss Chen suggested gently. Harold found himself stepping back, opening his door wider. The boys filed past him, their shoes squeaking on the hardwood floors Emma had always kept so pristine. They moved as a unit, the older ones instinctively herding the younger, like a flock of wary birds finding shelter from a storm. In his living room. They perched awkwardly on the edges of furniture that hadn't held children in decades. Tommy's eyes went immediately to Emma's piano, his small hand reaching out, but not quite touching the keys. Ms. Chen efficiently laid out the situation. Their previous foster home had been shut down unexpectedly. The boys needed a safe place, while more permanent arrangements could be made. All the usual emergency homes were full. "Just a few days," she repeated, though something in her tone suggested she knew it might be longer. "They're good boys, Mr. Preston. They just need a chance." Harold looked at the group, really looked at them. Michael, trying so hard to be strong for his brothers. James and Robert, identical twins with untied shoelaces and scraped knees. Peter, who hadn't stopped watching the door as if waiting for someone to come take them away again. And tiny Tommy, who had finally emerged from behind Michael to stare in wonder at the old family photos on the wall. He thought of Emma, of her dreams of filling this old house with young voices again. He thought of his 3 months stretching out empty before him, and he thought of how scared these boys must be, bounced from place to place like unwanted parcels. "They can stay," he heard himself say, as if someone else were speaking through him, "for a few days." The relief on Ms. Chen's face was visible. She pulled out forms, explaining rules and responsibilities, emergency contacts and medication schedules. Harold signed where indicated, his hand steadier than it had been in days. As Ms. Chen prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "You're doing a wonderful thing, Mr. Preston." Harold watched the boys exploring the room with cautious curiosity. Tommy had discovered Emma's collection of seashells, handling them with surprising gentleness. "My wife," he said softly, "would have known exactly what to do." "Sometimes," Ms. Chen replied, "just providing a safe harbor is enough." After she left, Harold stood in his living room, suddenly overwhelmed by the presence of 5 young lives under his roof. The silence that had plagued him for years was gone, replaced by the soft shuffling of feet and whispered conversations. "Sir?" Michael spoke up, his voice careful and measured. "Where should we put our things?" Harold realized with a start that each boy carried only a single backpack, their whole lives packed into such small spaces. "The spare rooms," he said, "upstairs, and please call me Harold." As he watched them climb the stairs, Harold felt something shift in the air of the old farmhouse. For better or worse, his last 3 months would not be spent in solitude after all. The first night descended into barely contained chaos. Harold stood in his kitchen, surrounded by empty cupboards and 5 hungry boys, realizing he hadn't cooked a proper meal since Emma died. The pizza delivery driver seemed bemused by the order from the old farmhouse, where no children had lived for decades. "We can help," Michael offered, watching Harold struggle with paper plates and napkins. The teenager's eyes held a wisdom beyond his years, scanning the kitchen as if cataloguing its deficiencies. "We're used to taking care of ourselves." Those words struck Harold like a physical blow. No child should be used to such things. "No," he said firmly, surprising himself with the strength in his voice. "You're guests here. Sit down and eat while it's hot." The younger boys needed no further encouragement, descending on the pizza like a small army. Tommy, the youngest, carefully picked off his olives, creating a neat pile on the edge of his plate. Harold noticed James secretly passing his crusts to Robert, who devoured them with obvious delight. "Do you live here all alone?" Peter asked between bites, his 8-year-old curiosity overwhelming his initial shyness. Harold nodded toward Emma's photograph. "My wife and I lived here together for many years. She passed away 5 years ago." "Like our mum," Tommy said softly, and the kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the old clock. Michael shot his youngest brother a warning look, but Harold leaned forward, genuinely interested. "Would you like to tell me about her?" The boys exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Michael spoke, his words careful and measured. "She was sick for a long time. After she died, our dad, he couldn't handle it. That's when we went into the system." Harold recognized the pain behind the boy's matter-of-fact tone. It was the same pain he'd carried after losing Emma, the kind that made you build walls around your heart. "Your mother must have been very special," Harold said gently, "to raise such fine young men." Tommy's eyes welled with tears, and before anyone could react, he launched himself from his chair into Harold's lap. The old man caught him reflexively, wincing at the impact, but wrapping his arms around the small, trembling form. "I'm sorry," Michael started to rise. "Tommy, come back." "It's all right," Harold assured him, though his joints protested. "Sometimes we all need a good hug." The evening progressed with the complicated choreography of getting 5 boys ready for bed in an unfamiliar house. Harold discovered his linen closet was woefully understocked, and the spare rooms hadn't been aired out properly in years. But somehow they managed. It wasn't until he was tucking Tommy into bed, a task he hadn't expected but couldn't refuse when the boy asked so hopefully, that Harold noticed the drawing. While the others had been arranging their sleeping spaces, Tommy had been quietly creating art with a stubby pencil and a scrap of paper. "What's this?" Harold asked, picking up the paper from the bedside table. Tommy sat up eagerly. "It's us. See? That's you, and that's Michael, and James, and Robert, and Peter, and me." The stick figures stood in front of what was clearly meant to be the farmhouse, complete with Emma's overgrown rose bushes. "You drew our whole family," Harold said softly, then caught himself. But Tommy was already asleep, his small face peaceful in the glow of the hallway light. Harold sat there longer than he should have, watching the boy's gentle breathing. His doctor's words echoed in his mind, 3 months, along with Ms. Chen's promise of just a few days. The drawing trembled slightly in his shaking hands. When he finally made his way downstairs, he found Michael sitting at the kitchen table, illuminated by a single lamp. "You should be in bed," Harold said. "I always wait until they're all asleep," Michael explained. "Just in case." "In case of what?" Michael shrugged, but his eyes were old in his young face. "In case we have to leave quickly. In case something goes wrong. In case they need me." Harold settled into the chair across from him, his joints creaking. "You've been taking care of them for a long time, haven't you?" "Someone has to." "Yes." Harold agreed, thinking of Emma, of all the ways love makes us stronger than we think we can be. "But tonight they're safe. You're safe. Get some rest, Michael." The teenager hesitated, then nodded. As he stood to go upstairs, he paused. "Thank you, Mr. Harold, for the pizza and everything." After Michael left, Harold sat alone in his kitchen, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of children sleeping. In his home, the house felt different already, as if it were waking up from a long slumber. In his pocket, Tommy's drawing crinkled softly, a paper testament to the unexpected turns life could take. Outside, the autumn wind whispered through Emma's rose bushes, and for the first time in 5 years, Harold felt something stir in his heart, something that felt suspiciously like hope. Morning arrived with the thundering sound of young feet on old stairs. Harold, already awake and nursing his first cup of coffee, watched in amazement as his quiet routine transformed into organized chaos. Michael efficiently directed his brothers through their morning preparations, a skill born of long practice. But it was during breakfast that Harold noticed something concerning. As he set out bowls of cereal, mental note, buy more groceries, he observed Michael helping Tommy with his spoon while trying to hide his own struggles with the text on the cereal box. "Michael," Harold said carefully, "would you read that ingredient list for me? My eyes aren't what they used to be." The teenager's face flushed, his hands tightening on the box. Maybe later." Understanding dawned. Harold retrieved an old primer from Emma's teaching days, preserved in her desk drawer. She'd used it during her years as a reading specialist, helping struggling students find their way through the written word. "You know," Harold said casually, "I used to help Emma with her students. Perhaps after breakfast, you and I could take a look at this together." Michael's expression wavered between shame and longing. "I should help with the dishes. The twins can handle that," Harold assured him, catching James and Robert's attention. "Right, boys?" They nodded enthusiastically, probably more excited about playing in the water than actual cleaning. Peter, volunteered to help Tommy get dressed, displaying the familiar competence of children who'd learned to rely on each other. In Emma's study, Harold and Michael sat side by side at the old desk. The primer's pages were yellowed, but well preserved, filled with Emma's careful annotations. "My wife believed," Harold said softly, "that it's never too late to learn something new. She taught children who were 5 and others who were 15. The only thing that mattered was their willingness to try." Michael ran his fingers over the pages. "In our last foster home, they said I was too old, that it wasn't worth the effort." Harold felt a surge of anger at the system that had failed this bright, responsible young man. Well, they were wrong. Shall we prove them wrong together? For the next hour, while the younger boys played quietly, or as quietly as children can, in the living room, Harold guided Michael through the basics. The teenager was a quick study, his intelligence evident in how rapidly he grasped concepts once they were properly explained. "You know," Harold mentioned during a break, "Emma kept all her teaching materials. Books at every level, workbooks, everything a growing reader might need." Michael looked up sharply. "But we're only here for a few days." Harold ignored the twinge in his chest at those words. "Then we'd better make the most of them, shouldn't we?" Their lesson was interrupted by a crash from the kitchen, followed by the sound of running water and muffled giggling. Harold and Michael found the twins attempting to clean up a small flood, their clothes soaked but their faces determined. "Sorry," James began, but Harold was already chuckling. "You should have seen the messes I made when I was learning to wash dishes," he said, grabbing a towel to help. "Once I flooded the entire kitchen trying to fix a leaky pipe. Emma didn't let me live that down for years." As they worked together to restore order, Harold noticed Tommy watching from the doorway, clutching something behind his back. When the floor was finally dry, the small boy approached shyly. "I made something," he announced, revealing another drawing. This one showed Michael and Harold sitting at the desk, surrounded by books. The details were childish but touching. Harold's glasses, Michael's serious expression, even Emma's old desk lamp. "It's perfect," Harold said, his voice rough with emotion. "We should hang it up." "Really?" Tommy's face lit up. "Like in a real home?" The innocent question pierced Harold's heart. He thought of the doctor's prognosis, of the temporary nature of this arrangement, of all the reasons he should maintain emotional distance. Instead, he found himself nodding. "Yes," he said firmly, "like in a real home." Later that afternoon, while the boys were occupied with various activities, Michael practicing his reading, the twins exploring the backyard under strict instructions. Not to climb anything, Peter organizing his few possessions with methodical care, and Tommy adding to his growing collection of drawings, Harold received an unexpected visit from Mrs. Thompson. "I saw children in your yard," she said without preamble. "Harold Preston, what have you done?" He explained the situation, watching her expression shift from concern to understanding, to something that looked suspiciously like approval. "Emma would be proud," she said finally, "but you'll need help. Those boys need proper meals, clothes, school supplies." "It's temporary," Harold reminded her and himself. Mrs. Thompson gave him a knowing look. "Nothing in life is permanent, Harold. That doesn't mean it's not worth doing right." As if to emphasize her point, Tommy chose that moment to race through the kitchen, pursued by a laughing Peter, their joy echoing off the old walls like music. "Besides," Mrs. Thompson added with a smile, "this old house has been too quiet for too long." Looking at Tommy's drawing now hanging proudly on the refrigerator, Harold couldn't help but agree. The house felt alive again, filled with purpose and possibility. If only he had more time to see where this unexpected journey might lead. The idea for the treehouse came from the twins, James and Robert, who spent hours staring up at the ancient oak tree in Harold's backyard. Their whispered conversations and meaningful glances didn't go unnoticed, especially when they began collecting scrapwood from around the property. "We can build it ourselves," James insisted when Harold caught them dragging a weathered plank across the yard. "We've done it before. With rope and nails we found," Robert added proudly, then wilted slightly under his brother's warning look. The thought of the boys attempting such a project with scavenged materials sent a chill through Harold's spine. "How about we do this properly?" he suggested, surprising himself as much as the twins. "I may have some experience in this area." Indeed, he'd helped build several tree houses during his younger years, including one for his own children decades ago. The knowledge was still there, tucked away in his mind like so many other memories of a more active life. The trip to Anderson's Hardware became a community event. Mrs. Thompson insisted on driving, her station wagon more suitable for lumber than Harold's old sedan. Michael came along to help carry supplies, while Peter appointed himself official list keeper, clutching a notepad with determined concentration. "Well, look who's finally taking on a project." Joe Anderson himself emerged from behind the counter, his weathered face breaking into a smile at the sight of Harold. "Martha told me you had some young visitors." As the twins eagerly described their vision for the treehouse, Joe listened with genuine interest. Harold noticed the older man's eyes drift occasionally to his trembling hands, but Joe said nothing, simply began gathering materials with professional efficiency. "Pressure-treated lumber," Joe explained to the boys. "Proper support brackets, galvanized hardware." He added a few items Harold hadn't thought to list, including safety equipment. That made Michael's eyes widen, with unused to such consideration for their well-being. When Harold reached for his wallet, Joe waved him off. "Put it on my tab. Consider it a welcome gift for your new crew." Back at the farm, the project took shape under Harold's careful guidance. He couldn't do the heavy lifting anymore, but he could teach. Michael proved to be a natural with tools, his careful attention to detail serving him well. The twins worked as a seamless unit, anticipating each other's needs without a word. Even Peter contributed, organizing tools and retrieving items with impressive efficiency. Tommy, deemed too young for construction work, appointed himself project documentarian, drawing detailed pictures of their progress and offering running commentary from a safe distance. Word spread through the neighborhood. Soon, other helpers appeared. Mr. Chen from down the road brought his power drill and expertise. The Peterson boys from 2 farms over offered their young muscles and enthusiasm. Even teenagers from the new housing development showed up, curious about this unusual activity at the old Preston place. Harold supervised from his lawn chair, dispensing advice and ensuring safety measures were followed. If his hands shook more than usual, if he needed to rest more frequently, no one mentioned it. The boys were too absorbed in their project to notice his occasional grimaces of pain, or the way Mrs. Thompson watched him with concerned eyes. The treehouse took shape over several days, growing from a simple platform to a proper shelter with walls, a roof, and even a small window. Harold insisted on proper railings and a sturdy ladder, remembering Emma's cautious nature when it came to children's safety. "It's the finest tree house in the county," Joe Anderson declared when he stopped by to inspect the finished project. "You boys should be proud," and they were. Harold could see it in their faces as they stood back to admire their work. But it was more than pride in construction. It was the pride of creation, of working together, of building something lasting. That evening, as the boys ate dinner on their new perch, after Harold had triple-checked its stability, he watched them from below. The setting sun painted the scene in warm colors, their laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. Suddenly a sharp pain gripped his chest, forcing him to sit heavily in his chair. Mrs. Thompson, who had stayed to help with dinner, was at his side instantly. "Harold, I'm fine," he managed, though they both knew it was a lie. "Just tired." "You need to tell them," she said softly, meaning both the boys and the various neighbors who had begun to take an interest in the Preston farm's new residents. Harold watched Tommy lean out the treehouse window, waving excitedly, Michael's steady hand on his younger brother's shoulder, keeping him safe. The twins sharing a sandwich, their usual perfect synchronization, Peter carefully storing tools in the new box they'd built specifically for treehouse supplies. "Not yet," he whispered, Let them have this moment. Let them be children who built something wonderful, not boys waiting for another loss. Mrs. Thompson squeezed his shoulder but said nothing. Above them, the boys' laughter continued, floating out across the darkening fields like a promise of better days to come. The hospital bracelet felt like a shackle around Harold's wrist, its plastic edge catching on his sweater sleeve. He'd managed to hide the emergency room visit from the boys, thanks to Mrs. Thompson's help, but keeping secrets was becoming harder, as his health declined more rapidly than expected. "Your condition is progressing faster than we anticipated," Dr. Mitchell had said, his voice gentle but firm. "You should consider making arrangements sooner rather than later." The boys had been with him for 3 weeks now. 3 weeks of chaos and laughter, of learning and growing. 3 weeks of pretending he had more time than he did. Michael found him sitting in Emma's study that evening, staring at the bracelet. He couldn't quite bring himself to remove. "Are you sick?" the teenager asked directly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had asked this question before and dreaded the answer. Harold considered lying, but those serious eyes deserved. "Better. Yes," he admitted, "I am." Michael's face remained carefully neutral, but his hands clenched at his sides. "How bad?" "Bad enough." Harold gestured to the chair beside him. "Sit down, son." The words slipped out unintentionally, but Michael didn't seem to mind. He sat, his lanky frame tense with anticipation of bad news. "I should have told you sooner," Harold began, "but I didn't want to worry you boys. You've had enough worry in your lives. Are you going to die?" Michael's voice cracked slightly on the last word. Harold nodded slowly. "Eventually we all do. In my case, it will be sooner rather than later." "How long?" "The doctors originally said 3 months. That was when you boys arrived. It seems to be progressing faster now." Michael absorbed this information with the same quiet strength he showed in everything else. "Does Ms. Chen know? Will they take us away?" "Not yet," to both questions. Harold leaned forward, ignoring the pain in his chest. "Michael, I need you to listen to me. Whatever happens, I'm going to make sure you boys are taken care of. I promise you that." "We've heard promises before," Michael said softly, but without bitterness. "Adults always mean well, but they don't always follow through," Harold finished. "I know, but I'm not most adults, and this isn't most situations." A commotion from downstairs interrupted their conversation. The sounds of Tommy crying and Peter trying to comfort him. Michael started to rise, but Harold held up a hand. "Let me," he said, "while I still can." They found Tommy huddled in a corner of the kitchen, clutching a broken picture frame. It was one of Emma's favorites, a photo of her garden in full bloom. "I didn't mean to," Tommy hiccuped. "I was trying to dust it like Mrs. Thompson showed us." Harold carefully took the frame, removing the photo from the broken glass. "You know what? I think this photo would look much better without the glass. Anyway, that way we can feel the flowers with our fingers." Tommy's tears slowed as he watched Harold methodically clean up the glass and place the photo in a new place of honor on the refrigerator, right next to the growing collection of Tommy's drawings. "There," Harold said, "sometimes broken things lead us to better arrangements." That evening, Harold noticed Michael speaking quietly with his brothers, one by one. He couldn't hear the conversations, but he recognized the look of gentle preparation. In the teenager's eyes, Michael was doing what he'd always done, helping his brothers face difficult truths. The next morning, Harold found 5 handmade cards on his bedside table. Tommy's was filled with colorful drawings. Peter had written a careful list of all the things Harold had taught him. The twins had collaborated on an elaborate illustration of the treehouse, and Michael's contained 3 simple words that made Harold's eyes fill with tears. "We love you." Mrs. Thompson arrived later with more casseroles and concerned glances. "The whole town's talking," she said, "about you and the boys. People want to help." "I'm dying, Martha," Harold said bluntly. "These boys need more than casseroles and good intentions." "Then we'll give them more," she replied with equal directness. "This community raised all our children together, Harold. We can do it again." As if to emphasize her point, Joe Anderson's truck pulled into the driveway, loaded with supplies for what he called necessary home improvements. Behind him came the Chen family, the Petersons, and others from both the old farming community and the new developments. Harold watched from his chair as his neighbors began working on his house, fixing the roof, repairing the furnace, cleaning out gutters. The boys joined in where they could, belonging in a way they never had before. "You've started something here," Mrs. Thompson said softly. "Something bigger than yourself." Harold touched the hospital bracelet under his sleeve, thinking of time, slipping away faster than expected. But looking at his boys working alongside their neighbors, he realized that perhaps time wasn't the most important measure of impact. That night, as he tucked Tommy into bed, a task that grew more difficult but more precious each day, the small boy asked, "Are you going to heaven like our mom?" Harold's heart clenched, but he answered honestly, "Yes, sweetheart, but not." "And quite yet," Tommy nodded solemnly. "Can you say hi to her for me? And tell her we're okay now. We found a new family." Through his tears, Harold could only nod, holding Tommy close until the boy fell asleep, his small hand clutching Harold's sweater as if to keep him there forever. The garden began with a handful of seeds and Tommy's endless questions about the overgrown rose bushes. Harold found himself sharing Emma's gardening wisdom as he helped the youngest boy clear a small patch of earth behind the house. "Your wife knew a lot about plants," Tommy observed, carefully placing bean seeds in the shallow trenches Harold had shown him how to dig. "That she did," Harold smiled, reaching for Emma's old garden journal. "She kept track of everything she grew right here in this book." The other boys, initially skeptical of gardening, were drawn in by Harold's stories of Emma's victory garden during leaner years. Michael especially seemed interested in the practical aspects of growing food. "Could we really grow enough to feed ourselves?" he asked, studying Emma's careful diagrams of crop rotation. "With proper planning and care, a garden can feed many mouths," Harold explained. "Emma used to supply half the neighborhood with fresh vegetables." The project quickly expanded beyond Tommy's small patch. The twins, James and Robert, threw themselves into clearing the overgrown beds with their usual synchronized efficiency. Peter revealed a talent for organization, meticulously labeling rows and recording planting dates in a notebook of his own. Word spread through the community, as it always did. Soon neighbors began stopping by with seedlings, tools and advice. Mrs. Thompson brought over her grandmother's recipe for organic pest control. Joe Anderson donated irrigation supplies. The Chen family shared their expertise in Asian vegetables, expanding the garden's diversity. Harold supervised from his chair under the old apple tree, Emma's garden journal open on his lap. His hands shook too much now for delicate planting work, but he could still teach. He watched Michael master the art of pruning. Tommy learned to identify beneficial insects, and the twins develop an almost supernatural ability to predict rain. "You're creating quite the farmers here," Mrs. Thompson observed one afternoon, bringing out lemonade for the working crew. Harold watched Tommy carefully watering his bean sprouts, which had just broken through the soil. "I'm teaching them what Emma taught me, that growth takes time, patience and love, and community," Mrs. Thompson added, nodding toward where Michael was helping Mr. Chen install a trellis for climbing peas. The garden became more than just a project. It became a symbol of hope, of future harvests that Harold knew he wouldn't see. Each seed planted was a promise to tomorrow, each tender shoot a reminder that life continues beyond loss. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Harold found all 5 boys in the garden. Michael was reading aloud from Emma's journal, his newfound reading skills put to practical use. The twins were demonstrating proper weeding technique to Peter, while Tommy drew pictures of their future harvest in the margins of his own little garden notebook. "Mr. Harold!" Tommy called out, running over with dirt-stained hands. "Look what we found!" In his palm lay a single perfect strawberry, the first fruit from the plants Mrs. Thompson had donated. Tommy insisted on splitting it 5 ways so each brother could taste their garden's first harvest. Harold watched them savor their tiny portions, their faces bright with accomplishment. In that moment, he saw Emma's garden legacy living on through these boys who had come into his life so unexpectedly. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Harold sat at his kitchen table with Emma's garden journal. With trembling hands, he began to write, "My dearest boys, in this journal you'll find not just instructions for growing vegetables, but lessons for growing life. Emma taught me that a garden is hope made visible. Every seed planted is an act of faith in tomorrow. You've already learned more than you realize, how to nurture growth, how to be patient, how to work together, how to trust in future harvests. When I'm gone, this garden will be yours. Let it feed you, teach you, and remind you that you are rooted in love and community." Emma always said that gardening is the art of believing in tomorrow. Believe in yourselves as I believe in you. With all my love, Harold. He tucked the letter into the journal's back cover, then walked slowly to the window. Outside, in the moonlight, the garden sprawled like a promise. New growth pushed through old soil. Emma's roses mingled with Tommy's. Beans, and somewhere beneath it all, roots grew stronger every day. A soft knock at the door interrupted his reverie. Mrs. Thompson stood there, holding a stack of seed catalogues. "I thought the boys might like to plan for next spring," she said, then caught herself. "I mean, yes," Harold said firmly. "They should plan for spring. They should plan for many springs to come, because that was what gardens were about after all, believing in tomorrow, even when you knew you wouldn't be there to see it bloom." The storm came without warning, a late autumn tempest that sent the boys scrambling for shelter in the old farmhouse. Harold watched from his armchair as rain lashed against the windows and wind howled through the eaves, each gust a reminder of the house's advancing age. Tommy huddled close to Harold's side, clutching the family Bible they'd found earlier that day while cleaning the attic. The leather-bound volume had been a wedding gift to Harold and Emma, its pages filled with pressed flowers and handwritten notes from decades of Sunday services. "Can you read us a story?" Tommy asked, his voice barely audible above the storm. The other boys, trying to appear brave but clearly unsettled by the weather's fury, gathered around. Even Michael, who usually maintained his teenage dignity, settled onto the floor near Harold's feet. "Let's see," Harold said, carefully opening the Bible to where Emma had marked her favorite passages. His hands trembled more than usual today. The doctor's latest tests had confirmed his condition was advancing rapidly, but he managed to find the right page. Before he could begin reading, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the house. Simultaneously, the lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness broken only by occasional flashes of lightning. "Everyone stay calm." Michael's steady voice cut through the darkness. "I'll find the flashlights. Second drawer in the kitchen," Harold directed. Emma always kept emergency supplies there. As Michael navigated the dark house, Harold felt Tommy's small hand slip into his. The other boys drew closer, forming a tight circle in the darkness. Through the window, lightning illuminated the treehouse, swaying precariously in the wind. Michael returned with flashlights and an old battery-powered radio. The local weather report crackled through with warnings of severe thunderstorms and possible flooding. "The garden," Peter said suddenly, "all our plants." "Plants are stronger than you think," Harold assured him, though his own heart ached, thinking of the tender seedlings they'd so carefully nurtured. "They know how to bend with the storm." Another thunderous boom, and suddenly Harold felt a sharp pain in his chest. He tried to hide his grimace, but Michael's keen eyes caught the movement. "Mr. Harold," the teenager's voice carried a note of alarm. "Just startled by the thunder," Harold lied, forcing a smile they probably couldn't see in the darkness. "Now, about that story." He began reading by flashlight, his voice steady despite the pain. The familiar words of faith and perseverance seemed especially poignant as the storm raged outside. Emma had always said that the Bible wasn't just about religion. It was about finding light in the darkness, hope in the storm. The boys listened intently, even the twins staying unusually still. Tommy's hand remained firmly in Harold's, while Peter leaned against his chair, and Michael kept a protective watch over them all. When another wave of pain hit, stronger this time, Harold faltered mid-sentence. The Bible slipped from his trembling hands, caught deftly by Michael before it could hit the floor. "I'll read," Michael offered, his voice gentle with understanding. Harold nodded gratefully, closing his eyes as the teenager's clear voice took up the story. Through his pain, Harold marveled at how far Michael's reading had come in just a few weeks. The boy who had struggled with cereal box labels now read with growing confidence, stumbling occasionally over difficult words, but pressing on with determination. The storm seemed to last for hours. As Michael read, Harold drifted in and out of awareness, the pain in his chest a constant reminder of his dwindling time. He thought of Emma, of storms they had weathered together in this old house. He thought of the boys and all the storms they would face without him. "Harold?" Mrs. Thompson's voice cut through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, raincoat dripping, having used her emergency key to check on them. One look at his face and she knew. "Boys," she said calmly, "I need you to help me gather some supplies from my house. We might be in for a long night." The younger ones obediently followed her, but Michael hesitated. "I should stay." "Go," Harold managed. "Help your brothers." Once they were gone, Mrs. Thompson quickly called for an ambulance. "The roads are bad," she warned. "It might take them time to get here." Harold nodded, fighting to stay conscious. "The boys will be taken care of," she promised. "This whole community will make sure of it." Through the window, lightning illuminated the garden, where new life struggled against the storm. Like the plants, the boys would learn to bend, not break. They would grow stronger through this, as they had grown stronger through every other storm life had sent their way. When the boys returned, Harold was sitting up straighter, determined to show strength for their sake. The Bible lay open on his lap, Emma's pressed flowers still marking pages that held comfort for dark nights. "Shall we continue the story?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. And so they waited out the storm together, voices rising above. The thunder, love stronger than fear, family forged in the face of nature's fury and life's uncertain path. The morning after the storm, Harold sat in Dr. Mitchell's office, his hands clasped tightly in his lap to hide their trembling. The news wasn't unexpected, but it still hit hard. Weeks now, not months. "There are options for hospice care," the doctor was saying, but Harold's mind was already elsewhere, focused on 5 boys who needed more than just a few weeks of stability. Back at the farm, the community had rallied to assess storm damage. Joe Anderson was already up on the roof, patching where the wind had torn away shingles. The Chen family helped salvage what they could from the garden, which had weathered the storm better than expected, much like the boys themselves. Mrs. Thompson met Harold at the door, her expression telling him she'd guessed the doctors. "A verdict. The social worker called," she said quietly. "She's coming tomorrow to check on the boys." Harold nodded, watching through the window as Michael helped Tommy replant a row of beans that had been uprooted by the wind. The other boys worked alongside their neighbors, learning the art of restoration after destruction. "We need to call a meeting," Harold said finally. "Everyone who's been involved with the boys. Tonight." Word spread quickly through the tight-knit community. That evening, Harold's living room filled with familiar faces. The Andersons, the Chens, the Petersons, and several other families from both the old farming community and the new developments. Mrs. Thompson had arranged for the boys to spend the evening at her house, watching movies and staying carefully out of earshot. "I'm dying," Harold announced without preamble. The room fell silent, though this news couldn't have been entirely surprising to those who had watched his decline. "I have weeks, at most. These boys need more than that." He pulled out a folder. of legal documents he'd been preparing. With the help of Emma's old lawyer friend, I'm asking this community to make a choice. These boys have known nothing but temporary homes and broken promises. I'm asking you to help me change that. The plan was ambitious. A community guardianship program, with several families sharing responsibility for the boys' care. The farmhouse would remain their home base, maintained by a trust Harold had set up with his savings and property value. Mrs. Thompson would serve as primary guardian, but others would have specific roles. The Chens offering academic support, the Andersons teaching practical skills, the Petersons sharing their sports expertise. It's an unusual arrangement, Harold admitted, but these are unusual circumstances, and these boys deserve an unusual effort. The social services system, someone began, will be more likely to approve an unorthodox arrangement if an entire community stands behind it, Harold finished. These boys have already lost too much. I won't have them lose their home and each other as well. One by one, hands raised in support. Signatures were added to documents. Commitments were made. As the meeting concluded, Harold felt a weight lift from his chest, even as the physical pain increased. Mrs. Thompson brought the boys home to find their future guardians still gathered in the living room. Michael, ever observant, took in the serious faces and legal papers with growing understanding. "You're not getting better," he said to Harold, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "No," Harold agreed, "but I'm making sure you will be." He explained the arrangement to the boys, watching their faces as they absorbed this latest change in their lives. Tommy climbed into his lap, while the others drew closer, forming their usual protective circle. "You're not sending us away?" Peter asked cautiously. "No one is going anywhere," Harold assured them. "This house will always be your home. These people, our neighbors, our friends, they're going to help make sure of that. But we want you," Tommy whispered. Harold held him closer, ignoring the pain that simple movement caused. "I know, sweetheart. I want to stay too. But sometimes love means making sure others are taken care of, even when you can't be there yourself." Michael, who had been quiet throughout the explanation, finally spoke. "You did all this for us?" "No," Harold said softly. "You did this. You 5 boys reminded this community what it means to be a family. You brought life back to this old house, hope back to an old man's heart. This is just us returning the favor." The room grew quiet, filled with the weight of emotion that needed no words. Outside, the garden showed signs of recovery, new growth, already pushing through storm-damaged soil. Like the plants they had tended together, these boys would put down roots, grow strong, and flourish, not despite their hardships, but because of the love and care that had helped them weather life's storms. Harold spent his remaining days creating a legacy of lessons for his boys. Each morning, despite his weakening condition, he would sit at Emma's old desk and write in a leather-bound journal Mrs. Thompson had given him for this purpose. "Remember, to water the tomatoes from the base, not the leaves," he wrote one day, his handwriting shakier but still determined. "And remember that, like plants, people need both roots to hold them steady and room to grow." The boys watched him writing, understanding the importance of these moments, even if they couldn't bear to acknowledge why. Michael would often sit quietly nearby, reading from Emma's old books. The twins took turns bringing Harold tea, competing to see who could carry the cup without spilling. Peter kept meticulous track of medications and doctor's visits in his notebook, while Tommy continued to fill the refrigerator with drawings of their future together. "What are you writing?" Tommy asked one afternoon, climbing carefully into Harold's lap, as he had done so many times before. "Stories," Harold explained, "about life and love and growing gardens, about 5 brave boys who taught an old man how to live again." He had separate sections for each boy, advice for Michael about leadership and the importance of allowing himself to be young sometimes, guidelines for the twins about channeling their energy into positive pursuits, encouragement for Peter to maintain his wonderful organizational skills while remembering to dream. And for Tommy, pages of simple wisdom about love, art, and finding beauty in everyday moments. Between the life lessons and practical advice, Harold tucked away small treasures, pressed flowers from the garden, photographs Mrs. Thompson had taken, of their time together, ticket stubs from their first movie outing, and Tommy's countless drawings. "When you're older," he wrote, "you might wonder if this brief time meant as much as you remember. Let me assure you, love doesn't need years to take root. Sometimes a handful of days planted in fertile soil and tended with care can grow into something eternal." The community continued their quiet support, understanding that these precious days needed to be focused on the small family that had formed so unexpectedly. Mrs. Thompson coordinated meals and visitors, ensuring Harold had energy for what mattered most, time with his boys. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades that reminded Harold of Emma's favorite roses, he gathered the boys for a special addition to his legacy journal. One by one, he asked them to share their hopes for the future, recording each dream with careful attention. Michael, after some hesitation, spoke of wanting to become a teacher, inspired by his experiences helping his brothers and learning to read. The twins enthusiastically described their plans to expand the garden into a proper farm. Peter shyly admitted his interest in becoming a doctor, while Tommy declared his intention to paint the world's biggest picture. Harold wrote it all down, adding his own wishes for each of them. "May Michael find joy in sharing knowledge as he has shown such patience in learning. May James and Robert nurture growth in all its forms. May Peter heal others with the same gentle care he has shown his family. May Tommy continue to see beauty where others might miss it." As he wrote these final wishes, Harold felt the weight of time pressing heavily. But looking at the boys, his boys, he knew that some part of him would live on through their achievements, their love, their future. "Mr. Harold," Tommy's voice was small but serious, "are you writing? So we won't forget you." Harold set down his pen, drawing the young boy close. "No, sweetheart. I'm writing so you'll always remember how much you are loved and how proud I am of each of you." That night, after the boys were asleep, Harold added one final entry to his journal. "My dear boys, you came into my life when I thought it was ending, only to show me it was beginning again in a different way. Through you, I have learned that family's not about time, it's about love. And love, like the seeds we planted together, grows on long after we're gone." The celebration was the boys' idea, though the entire community quickly embraced it. They transformed the old barn into a wonderland of handmade decorations, each one carrying special meaning. Paper chains made from pages of Emma's garden catalogues draped the rafters. Hand-painted signs told the story of their unlikely family. The first harvest from their garden, modest but precious, was arranged on tables borrowed from the church. Harold watched the preparations from his wheelchair, his body failing but his heart fuller than ever. The boys had insisted on keeping some details secret from him, disappearing into Mrs. Thompson's house for mysterious planning sessions. "You've given them something to focus on," Mrs. Thompson said softly, adjusting the blanket across his lap. "Something besides worry." The evening of the celebration arrived crisp and clear, stars appearing early in the autumn sky. Harold had dozed through much of the afternoon, saving his strength. When Michael helped him into the barn, he gasped at the transformation. Hundreds of drawings covered the walls, not just Tommy's, but art from all the boys. They had drawn their memories. Harold teaching Michael to read, the treehouse construction, garden moments, quiet evenings reading together. Between the drawings hung photographs contributed by neighbors, documenting the changes in both the property and its inhabitants over the past weeks. The community gathered, bringing food and music. Joe Anderson had rigged up proper lighting, making the old barn glow with warmth. The Chen family contributed paper lanterns, while the Petersons brought their teenage son's band to provide entertainment. But the true highlight came when the boys gathered in front of everyone. Michael, standing tall and proud, opened Emma's old Bible to a marked page. "Mr. Harold," he began, his voice clear and confident, "you taught me how to read, so it's fitting that I read this to you." Without stumbling once, he read a passage about love and family that had been one of Emma's favorites. The twins came, and forward next, presenting Harold with a handmade book filled with garden plans and drawings, their vision for the farm's future. Peter had added detailed notes about crop rotation and seasonal planning, while Tommy had illustrated each page with his characteristic joy and color. "We promise to keep it growing," James said firmly. "Just like you taught us," Robert added. Peter's contribution was a meticulously organized memory book, containing pressed flowers, ticket stubs, and carefully labeled photographs of their time together. "So we never forget a single day," he explained quietly. Tommy's gift was a large canvas he'd clearly worked on for days, a family portrait showing all of them in front of the farmhouse, with Emma's roses blooming in the background and an angel that looked suspiciously like Emma watching over them. "Mrs. Thompson helped me get the real paints," he said proudly. "Do you like it?" "Like it?" Harold's voice cracked. "It's perfect, absolutely perfect." But Michael had one more surprise. He pulled out Harold's legacy journal, the one he'd been writing in daily, and added a new section, letters from every person in the community, promising to help watch over the boys, to maintain the farm, to keep this newfound family together. "You've been writing to us about the future," Michael said. "We wanted you to know that we've been planning for it too." The celebration continued around them, but Harold remained focused on his boys. They had formed a protective circle around his wheelchair, just as they had around each other since the day they arrived. In their faces, he saw not just the children they were, but the men they would become, strong, compassionate, rooted in love and community. Tommy climbed carefully onto his lap one last time, mindful of Harold's weakness. "Are you happy?" he whispered. Harold looked at his family, both the boys who had claimed his heart and the community that had rallied around them. He thought of Emma, of how she would have loved this moment, these children, this celebration of life and love and possibility. "More than happy," he answered, holding Tommy close. "I'm blessed beyond measure." As the evening stars appeared through the barn's open doors, Harold felt a deep peace settle over him. The music played softly, his boys remained near, and the future, though it would unfold without him, felt secure in the promises made this night. In his final weeks, Harold devoted himself to sharing individual moments with each boy, creating memories and imparting last lessons that would echo long after he was gone. Mrs. Thompson helped arrange these precious encounters, understanding their importance for both Harold and the children. With Michael, the sessions often took place in Emma's study, where they had spent so many hours working on his reading. Now, the teenager read aloud confidently while Harold recorded his voice, capturing stories and poems that could comfort his younger brothers in future years. "You know," Harold said during one such session, "Emma always said that teaching someone to read was like giving them a key to unlock the world." Michael looked up from the book, his eyes serious. "You gave me more than that. You gave me a way to help my brothers." "You were already helping them," Harold reminded him. "You just needed someone to help you too. Remember that. It's okay to need help sometimes." The twins, James and Robert, received their lessons in the garden. Though Harold could no longer work the soil himself, he could guide their eager hands, teaching them the secrets Emma had passed down to him. "Every plant has its season," he explained, watching them carefully transplant late autumn seedlings. "Just like people, sometimes we bloom early, sometimes late, but we all have our time." "Even when it's short?" James asked quietly, and Harold knew he wasn't talking about plants anymore. "Especially then," Harold answered. "That's when we have to make every moment count." Peter's time often involved helping Harold organize his affairs, a task that suited the boy's methodical nature, while allowing for deeper conversations. "You remind me of myself at your age," Harold told him one afternoon, always wanting everything in its proper place, everything accounted for. Does it help? Peter asked. Having everything organized? Sometimes, Harold admitted. But I've learned that life's most precious moments often come when things get a little messy. Don't forget to embrace the chaos sometimes. With Tommy, the youngest, Harold spent hours listening to stories about anything and everything, watching him draw, and sharing simple wisdom disguised as casual conversation. "Why do you think the sky changes colors?" Tommy asked one evening, working on yet another drawing of their family. "Because the world is always changing," Harold replied, "but that doesn't make it any less beautiful. Sometimes change brings new colors we never expected to see." Harold had saved one special recording for last, his voice reading from Emma's favorite books, singing the lullabies she used to sing, telling stories of their life together. He included messages for each boy, words they might need to hear at different points in their lives. "When you're angry at the world," he recorded, thinking of Michael's quiet strength, "remember that you survived because you kept love in your heart. When you're tempted to go separate ways," he said for the twins, "remember that your bond is a gift, not a limitation. When you feel the need to control everything," he told Peter's future self, "remember that some of life's greatest blessings come from letting go. And when you think no one understands," he whispered for Tommy, "remember that you taught an old man to see the world through new eyes." Mrs. Thompson found him one evening, surrounded by photographs and recordings, tears streaming down his face. "I'm leaving them too soon," he confessed. "No," she said firmly. "You're leaving them with everything they need, love, memories, and a community that will stand by them. Emma would be proud." That night, Harold asked for all 5 boys to sleep in his room, something they had done occasionally since the storm. They arranged themselves in their usual formation, Michael in the armchair, the twins on a makeshift bed of blankets, Peter near the door, and Tommy curled up next to Harold's pillow. "Tell us a story," Tommy requested sleepily. Harold began the tale of how 5 brothers found their way to an old farmhouse and how love turned strangers into family. As the boys drifted off to sleep, he watched their peaceful faces in the dim light, committing every detail to memory. "Thank you," he whispered, his words meant for both Emma and the sleeping children who had given his last days such profound meaning. "Thank you for teaching me that family isn't counted in years, but in moments of love." The last days unfolded with a gentle grace that seemed almost choreographed by Emma herself. The boys, understanding now that their time with Harold was precious and finite, moved through the old farmhouse with unusual quietness, each finding their own way to say goodbye without speaking the word. Tommy spent hours creating thank you cards, his artistic skills growing with each new drawing. He captured moments Harold had almost forgotten, teaching Michael to read by lamplight, helping the twins build their treehouse, showing Peter how to organize Emma's recipe box, reading bedtime stories on stormy nights. "These are for after," Tommy explained simply, stacking the cards carefully in Harold's dresser drawer, "so you'll know we remember everything." The cards joined a growing collection of mementos, pressed flowers from their garden, photographs of their makeshift family, recordings of their voices, and countless drawings that chronicled their brief but profound time together. Michael, ever the protector, had taken to sleeping in the armchair beside Harold's bed, watchful, even in rest. During the day, he read aloud from Emma's favorite books, his voice strong and clear, where once he had struggled with simple words. One afternoon, as autumn sunlight filtered through the bedroom window, Michael paused in his reading. "I understand now," he said quietly, "why you spent so much time teaching me. It wasn't just about reading, was it?" Harold smiled weakly. "Emma always said that teaching someone to read was really teaching them to believe in themselves. You just needed someone to believe in you first." The twins had become garden sentinels, tending the late autumn plants with fierce dedication. They brought Harold daily reports, describing every new sprout and bud as if each were a small miracle. "The roses are still blooming," James announced. "One morning, even though it's almost winter," Robert added. "Just like Emma," Harold whispered, "always defying expectations." Peter, true to his nature, approached the situation with methodical care. He had created a schedule for Harold's medications, coordinating with Mrs. Thompson and the hospice nurse to ensure every moment of comfort possible. But it was during the quiet moments between caring for Harold that Peter revealed his deeper feelings. "I've been keeping track," he said one evening, showing Harold his notebook, "of all the things you've taught us, so we won't forget. The most important things," Harold assured him, "you'll carry in your heart." The community continued their subtle support, understanding that these final days belonged primarily to the small family that had formed so unexpectedly. Mrs. Thompson coordinated everything from a distance, ensuring the boys had what they needed while respecting their private time with Harold. Each night, all 5 boys gathered in Harold's room, sharing stories of their day and plans for tomorrow. They spoke of the garden's future, of school projects and dreams, carefully weaving their words around the knowledge that Harold wouldn't. "See these plans unfold. Promise me something," Harold said during one such evening. "Promise me you'll keep growing, together and separately. Promise me you'll let this community help you become the men I know you can be." "We promise," Michael answered for all of them, his voice thick with emotion. Tommy, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly climbed onto the bed and placed a hand over Harold's heart. "We'll keep you here," he said with childish certainty, "just like your wife." Harold covered the small hand with his own, feeling the warmth of love passed from one generation to the next. "Yes," he agreed, "that's exactly where I'll be." Later that night, when the boys were asleep in their familiar positions around his room, Harold wrote his final letter. "My beloved boys, in these last precious days, you've shown me that love doesn't need a lifetime to change lives forever. You came to me when I thought I had nothing left to give and proved that there is always more love to share, more life to live, more family to find. Remember that you are stronger together than apart. Remember that this community is your extended family now. Remember that every seed we planted in the garden and in our hearts will continue to grow. Most of all, remember that you are loved by me, by Emma, who brought you to me through that long-ago foster care application, and by each other. Thank you for making an old man's last chapter his most beautiful one. All my love, Harold." He sealed the letter and added it to Tommy's collection of thank you cards, a final gift for the family that had given his life such unexpected meaning in its closing days. Harold passed peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by the family he had found in his final months. The boys had fallen asleep in their usual places, Michael in the armchair, the twins on their makeshift bed, Peter by the door, and Tommy curled next to Harold's pillow. Mrs. Thompson found them like that in the morning, Harold's hand still resting protectively on Tommy's head. The room was filled with evidence of their love. Tommy's drawings covering the walls, Michael's books stacked neatly on the bedside table, the twins' freshly picked roses in a vase, and Peter's careful notes about Harold's last peaceful evening. Through the window, early morning sunlight illuminated Emma's garden, where late autumn flowers still bloomed against all odds. Mrs. Thompson's soft gasp woke Michael first. One look at Harold's peaceful face told him everything. Without a word, he moved to gather his younger brothers, drawing them close before they could fully understand what had happened. "He's with Emma now," Mrs. Thompson said gently, her own tears falling as she helped the boys say their first goodbye. Tommy reached for Harold's hand one last time. "He's still warm," he whispered. "That's the love he left behind," Michael answered, showing a wisdom beyond his years. "Remember what he said. It stays in our hearts." The boys remained close as the necessary arrangements were made, their community moving quietly around them with gentle efficiency. They found Harold's last letter together, reading it through tears and smiles as they recognized the gift he had left them. Not just a home or a future, but the certainty of being cherished. In the garden, the roses Emma had planted and Harold had tended continued to bloom, testimony to the enduring nature of love and the promise of renewal. 5 brothers stood together, their roots now firmly planted in soil, enriched by one man's final act of love. The community gathered in the farmhouse living room, just as they had weeks ago when Harold first proposed his plan. Now they came together to fulfill their promise, not just to him, but to the 5 boys who had brought such unexpected joy to their small town. Mrs. Thompson stood before the assembled neighbors, Harold's legacy journal in her hands. "Today we make official what Harold began," she announced, her voice steady despite her grief. "These boys are now our shared responsibility, our gift from a man who taught us all what family truly means." The document was simple, but powerful. A formal pledge signed by every family present, outlining their commitments to the boys' future. The Chens would oversee education, the Andersons would maintain the property, the Petersons would handle athletics and activities. Mrs. Thompson would serve as primary guardian, but the responsibilities of raising 5 growing boys would be shared by all. Michael, acting as spokesman for his brothers, addressed the group with quiet dignity. "Mr. Harold said that family isn't just about blood or time, it's about love and choice. Thank you for choosing us." Through the window, Harold's and now the boys' garden continued its quiet work of growth and renewal, a living testament to the power of roots well planted and carefully tended. 1 year later, the farmhouse stood transformed. The garden Harold had helped the boys plan now flourished under their care, supplemented by the community's knowledge and support. Emma's roses twined with new growth, creating a tapestry of old and new, memory and promise. Michael, now a sophomore, tutored younger students in reading. The twins had expanded the garden into a proper small farm, their produce regularly appearing at the local market. Peter's organizational skills had earned him top grades and a position on the student council. Tommy's art covered the walls of both their home and the local community center. Together with their extended family of neighbors and friends, they had created exactly what Harold had hoped for, a home where love grew stronger with each passing season. 10 years after Harold's passing, 5 college acceptance letters arrived at the old farmhouse. Michael's was from the State University's education program, the twins from agricultural college, Peter's from pre-med, and Tommy's from art school. 5 different paths growing from the same well-tended roots. In Emma's garden, now a flourishing community project, Harold's legacy continued to bloom. The boys, now young men, still gathered there on special occasions, remembering the brief but profound time when an elderly man with 3 months to live had given them a lifetime of love. Mrs. Thompson, her hair now fully silver, often said that Harold had known exactly what he was doing when he brought these boys into his life. He planted hope, she would say, and look how it has grown.